It was the largest country on Earth. It survived invasion, revolution, famine, and war. It built the world's first communist state and watched it collapse from within. This is the story of Russia, from the last Tsar to the fall of the Soviet Union. In 1900, Russia was ruled by Tsar Nicholas II, a gentle, well-meaning man who was completely unsuited to rule the most complex empire on Earth. Russia was a land of contradictions. It had the largest army in the world, but its soldiers fought with outdated weapons. It had vast natural resources, but most of its people lived in poverty. St. Petersburg was a city of palaces and culture, but the countryside was filled with starving peasants. In 1905, disaster struck. Russia went to war with Japan and lost humiliatingly. The Japanese Navy destroyed the entire Russian fleet. Protests erupted across the country. On a Sunday in January, peaceful demonstrators marched to the Winter Palace to present a petition to the Tsar. Soldiers opened fire. Hundreds were killed. Bloody Sunday, they called it. And it planted the seeds of revolution. But who was Nicholas II, really? Born in 1868, he never wanted to be Tsar. When his father, Alexander III, died suddenly, Nicholas reportedly said, "What is going to happen to me and all of Russia? I am not prepared to be a Tsar. I never wanted to become one." He was a devoted family man. He adored his wife Alexandra and their 5 children. He loved long walks, playing tennis, and reading. In another life, he might have been a perfectly happy country gentleman. But history had other plans. Russia in 1900 was an empire of 130 million people stretching across 11 time zones. It contained dozens of nationalities: Russians, Ukrainians, Poles, Finns, Georgians, Kazakhs, and hundreds more. Managing this vast empire required a ruler of extraordinary skill and vision. Nicholas had neither. He believed absolutely in autocracy, the idea that the Tsar ruled by divine right, answerable to God alone. When advisors suggested reforms, he ignored them. When revolutionaries demanded change, he arrested them. When the people cried out for bread, he sent soldiers. It was a recipe for disaster. When World War I began in 1914, Russia mobilized millions of soldiers, but the army was poorly equipped, poorly led, and poorly fed. By 1917, 2 million Russian soldiers were dead. Millions more had deserted. In February 1917, bread riots broke out in Petrograd. Soldiers refused to fire on the crowds. Within days, the 300-year-old Romanov dynasty collapsed. Tsar Nicholas abdicated. He handed over the largest empire in the world, and within months, he and his entire family would be dead. A provisional government took power, but they made a fatal mistake. They kept Russia in the war. In October 1917, Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks struck. In a single night, they seized control of the government. The world's first communist revolution had succeeded. Nothing would ever be the same. The February Revolution of 1917 happened almost by accident. It began with women textile workers in Petrograd going on strike for bread. Within days, hundreds of thousands had joined them. The Tsar ordered the army to restore order. But the soldiers, exhausted by 3 years of war, refused to fire on the crowds. Many joined the protesters instead. Nicholas, stranded on his royal train far from the capital, received desperate telegrams from his ministers. He dismissed them. By the time he understood the scale of what was happening, it was too late. On March 2nd, 1917, Nicholas II abdicated. He tried to pass the throne to his brother Michael. Michael refused. 300 years of Romanov rule ended not with a battle, but with a piece of paper signed on a train. Nicholas and his family were placed under house arrest. They were moved from palace to palace as the situation deteriorated. Finally, in the summer of 1918, they were taken to a basement in Yekaterinburg. On the night of July 16, 1918, the entire family, Nicholas, Alexandra, and their 5 children, the youngest just 13 years old, were shot and bayoneted by Bolshevik guards. The last Tsar of Russia was gone. The Bolshevik Revolution didn't bring peace. It brought civil war. The Red Army, led by Leon Trotsky, fought the White Army, a coalition of monarchists, democrats, and foreign powers who wanted to destroy communism before it spread. The war lasted 3 years. It was brutal beyond imagination. Villages were burned, hostages were executed. Famine killed millions. The Tsar and his family were shot in a basement in Yekaterinburg. By 1921, the Reds had won. But Russia was devastated. Lenin launched the new economic policy, allowing limited private trade to rebuild the economy. Then in 1924, Lenin died, and the struggle for power began. The Russian Civil War was not just a conflict between the Reds and the Whites. It was a chaos of competing forces: anarchists, nationalists, peasant armies, foreign interventionists, and warlords of every kind. Britain, France, America, and Japan all sent troops to Russia, hoping to strangle communism in its cradle. They failed. What made the Bolsheviks win was not military genius, though Trotsky was a remarkable organizer. It was politics. The Whites represented the old order: the landlords, the officers, the aristocracy. The Reds promised land to the peasants and an end to the war. The peasants chose the Reds. By 1921, the war was over. But the human cost was staggering. Between the Civil War, the famine, and the epidemics, Russia lost between 7 and 12 million people in just 4 years. Lenin surveyed the ruins of his revolution and made a pragmatic decision. The pure communist economy had failed. Factories had stopped. Farms had collapsed. Lenin introduced the new economic policy, allowing small businesses and private trade. It worked. By 1924, the economy was recovering, but Lenin would not live to see the results. In January 1924, after a series of strokes, he died at the age of 53, and the wolves began fighting over his legacy. Joseph Stalin was not supposed to win. He was seen as a dull administrator, not as brilliant as Trotsky, not as charismatic as others. But Stalin was patient and ruthless. One by one, he outmaneuvered his rivals. Trotsky was exiled, then hunted down and killed with an ice pick in Mexico. Others were arrested, tried, and shot. Stalin launched the collectivization of agriculture, forcing millions of peasants onto collective farms. Those who resisted were sent to labor camps in Siberia, the Gulag. In Ukraine, a deliberate famine, the Holodomor, killed between 3 and 7 million people. Then came the Great Purge. Between 1936 and 1938, Stalin arrested and executed virtually the entire senior leadership of the Red Army, the Communist Party, and Soviet society. Nearly 750,000 people were shot. Millions more were sent to the Gulag. The Soviet Union had become a totalitarian nightmare. And then, on June 22, 1941, it faced its greatest test. Stalin's rise to power is one of the most chilling stories in political history. He was born Yosef Vissarionovich Djugashvili in 1878 in Georgia, a small country on the edge of the Russian Empire. His father was a cobbler who beat him regularly. His mother was deeply religious and dreamed of her son becoming a priest. Instead, he became a revolutionary. He robbed banks for the Bolshevik cause. He was arrested and exiled to Siberia multiple times, and escaped multiple times. He was tough, cunning, and utterly without sentiment. After Lenin's death, he outmaneuvered every rival with the same method. Make an alliance, use your ally to destroy a common enemy, then destroy your ally. By 1929, he was the unchallenged dictator of the Soviet Union. The collectivization campaign was his first great crime. Millions of peasants, especially in Ukraine, resisted giving up their land. Stalin's response was merciless. Grain was seized from villages, even as people starved. Armed brigades prevented starving peasants from leaving their villages to search for food. In Ukraine, this became known as the Holodomor, death by hunger. Entire villages were wiped out. Children died in the streets. Parents ate grass and tree bark to survive. And Stalin continued to export grain to the West throughout the famine to earn foreign currency. He simply didn't care. Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union was the largest military operation in human history. 3 million German soldiers crossed the border on a single morning. They advanced hundreds of kilometers in weeks. The Soviet army collapsed. Millions of soldiers were captured. Kiev fell. Leningrad was surrounded. By December 1941, German forces could see the spires of Moscow through their binoculars. But Moscow didn't fall. Stalin stayed in the city. The Soviet people, despite everything he had done to them, fought with desperate courage. The winter of 1941 was the coldest in decades. German soldiers froze in their summer uniforms. The tide turned at Stalingrad. For 6 months, Soviet and German forces fought street by street, building by building, room by room. When it was over, an entire German army had been destroyed. From Stalingrad, the Soviet army never stopped advancing. By May 1945, Soviet soldiers raised the red flag over the ruins of the Reichstag in Berlin. The Soviet Union had lost 27 million people, more than any other nation in the war. But it had won. The Soviet victory in World War II came at a price that is almost impossible to comprehend. 27 million Soviet citizens dead. Entire cities reduced to rubble. 1,700 towns and 70,000 villages destroyed. 25 million people left homeless. The siege of Leningrad alone lasted 872 days. During the worst of the winter, people survived on 125 grams of bread per day, barely a slice. Over 1 million civilians died of starvation, cold, and bombardment. People ate cats, dogs, leather belts, and wallpaper paste. And yet the city did not surrender. At Stalingrad, Soviet and German soldiers fought in the ruins of a single apartment building for weeks. Snipers stalked each other through the rubble. The life expectancy of a newly arrived Soviet soldier was less than 24 hours. What drove ordinary Soviet people to fight with such ferocity? It was not love of Stalin. It was love of their homeland, their families, their villages, their language, their culture. They called it the Great Patriotic War. And they meant it. When Soviet soldiers finally reached Berlin in April 1945, many wept, not from joy, but from exhaustion, loss, and the memory of everything they had endured to get there. After the war, the Soviet Union emerged as one of only 2 superpowers on Earth. Stalin's armies occupied half of Europe. Communist governments were installed from Poland to Bulgaria. The Cold War began, a global struggle between American capitalism and Soviet communism. Both sides built nuclear weapons capable of destroying the world many times over. Stalin died in 1953. Nikita Khrushchev took power and denounced Stalin's crimes. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first satellite in space. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. But beneath the surface, the system was rotting. The economy couldn't keep up with military spending. Technology fell behind the West. People whispered jokes about the government's lies. Corruption was everywhere. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev came to power with two revolutionary ideas: glasnost, meaning openness, and perestroika, meaning restructuring. He wanted to reform communism. Instead, he unleashed forces he couldn't control. One by one, the Soviet republics declared independence. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989. Eastern Europe broke free. On December 25, 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev resigned. The Soviet flag was lowered over the Kremlin for the last time. The largest country on Earth had peacefully ceased to exist. The Cold War was over, and the world would never be the same. Russia's story in the 20th century is unlike any other. Revolution, famine, terror, war, and collapse, all in less than 100 years. 70 years of communism left deep scars that Russia still carries today. But the story doesn't end in 1991. What happened next? The chaos of the 1990s, the rise of Putin, the wars, that is a story for another video. Subscribe to History Drop. New video every week. See you there.